Hello again, everyone. It's been a minute since I've got the chance to talk to all of you, and a lot has changed since the last time that we talked. I've moved, I graduated college, but more importantly to the rest of you, a lot has happened in the NFL. The vast majority of the offseason is over as training camps are right around the corner. The draft has happened 2 weeks ago, and free agency is pretty much done now. So I just wanted to get on here and talk about something that I feel pretty strongly about. And that is, of course, the trade that the Seattle Seahawks and the Las Vegas Raiders made early on in the offseason involving quarterback Geno Smith. Now, if you know anything about me, you know I love me some Geno Smith. This is not just because he retweeted me on Twitter on multiple occasions. I just love him as a quarterback. He's one of my favorite guys to watch in the NFL, so just keep that in mind while you're watching this video. So just to get my biases out of the way. But I also want to talk about the offseason as a whole for these two teams, more so about the Seahawks because they made a lot of changes on the offensive side of the ball. They've completely overhauled their pass catching room outside of Jackson Smith and Jigba. They have a new quarterback. They have a new offensive coordinator. And without spoiling the video, I just kind of want to say, I don't love overhauling the only part of your offense that was functional while doing not much to address the glaring black hole you have up front. But I'll explain that. I'll dive into that deeper throughout the video. I don't need to go into it now. I want to start by talking about the player that was traded to the Raiders, and that is Geno Smith. And now, to adequately evaluate him, I think we first need to look at the situation that he was dealing with in Seattle. And if you ask me, it wasn't great, but I think he did the best he could to handle it. His 19.9% pressure to sack rate was the 13th best in the NFL, but I don't think that does his ability to avoid sacks justice because I think he is one of the premier pocket managers in the league. And there's a few reasons for that. Among those is that about half of his pressure came from the interior of the offensive line. And Geno is an underrated scrambler, but he's going to escape up the A gaps more so than beat guys around the edge, so interior pressure is naturally going to be more impactful to him. It's also worth noting that Geno was responsible for only 8% of his pressures, which is the 5th best mark in the NFL. Another thing to note is that the Seahawks ran the 4th highest percentage of straight dropbacks in the NFL last year at 45.17%. By that I mean, Geno Smith was responsible for just dropping back and throwing the football with no play action, no RPOs, no screens, and no run game at the 4th highest clip in the entire league. They put an enormous amount on his plate and served him what was almost certainly the worst interior offensive line in the league. And yet, he still didn't self-combust despite the insane amount of heat they put on him up front. So what though, right? That doesn't necessarily mean the Seahawks were having him hold on to the ball for a really long time and putting all that pressure on the offensive line. They could have been getting the ball out of his hands really quick and running a lot of quick game, and that stuff doesn't require any play action or anything I just mentioned, but unfortunately that wasn't the case. The Seahawks ran the 2nd highest percentage of 5 and 7 step drops in the NFL at 87.29%. The only team higher was the Jags at 88.77%, and if you watched any Doug Peterson interviews throughout the season last year, that entire staff was checked out by week 5. So just to summarize everything I threw at you, the Seahawks looked at an offensive line that was easily amongst the worst in the league, and they supplemented it by handing Geno one of the longest developing, most straight dropback heavy offenses in the league. Not great! And that's what led to Ryan Grubb getting fired after one season. My aim here is to demonstrate how poor this surrounding situation was for Geno and highlight one of his key strengths, his pocket presence. I also do want to clarify that straight dropbacks are not inherently a bad thing to ask your quarterback to do. In fact, if you want to go anywhere in the league, I think your quarterback kind of has to be able to operate under these circumstances because when the going gets tough and you're facing really good defenses and they're stifling the run game, you kind of have to be able to ask your quarterback to just go out there and make a play. Just not quite at the frequency that the Seahawks were trying to do with Geno last year. Now, there is a positive to this, and it's more so a positive for the Raiders this year, and it's the fact that Geno can operate in this type of conditions. He can run a bunch of straight dropbacks and long developing concepts, and here's an example of one of them. The Seahawks here are going to go 5 wide against a super aggressive defense who is showing some signs of blitz even though they eventually drop off. The route combination here is essentially 4 verts with a bender from the number 2, and there's a 5th receiver out in the route who's going to run a curl on the field side of this play. So we got 5 guys out in the route and only 5 in to protect against a man-heavy defense who is showing signs of blitz. Not great. But when Geno gets the snap, he sees man-to-man, and he knows he's got to get the ball out quick, so he puts this thing up and away on JSN's outside shoulder running down the seam. This is a perfectly located ball to a very well-covered receiver on a play where they only had 5 in to protect. Now, you think Brock Bowers is looking at this and likes what he sees? Because I think so. And now, I don't know what Chip Kelly is going to bring to the Raiders offense, but as far as Geno goes, I think he's going to have a much better offensive line than as a matter of fact, I know he's going to have a much better offensive line than he had with Seattle last year. And they just drafted a generational talent at running back with the 6th overall pick. So I think the run game is going to be better than what Seattle had last year and what the Raiders had last year, which is good because the Raiders run game sucked last year, for lack of better words. But I also think Chip Kelly can help with that. But there is some good news. If the run game doesn't get any better, they have a quarterback now who can handle a lot of dropbacks if the run game isn't working. I think it's a really, really good fit for both sides. Now, I don't think Geno's going to have to do as much as he did last year, but he can, and we've seen it for the last couple of years. And I kind of alluded to this earlier, but if you just take the heat maps of where Brock Bowers likes to operate and where Geno Smith likes to target, they seem to line up pretty well, and the film backs this up. Now, Brock Bowers can do pretty much whatever you want your tight end to do in the pass game, but he's especially going to feast over the middle and up the seams. The other thing that Bowers will give Geno Smith that he didn't really have in Seattle is a dynamic yak threat. Geno or not, I just think Bowers is one of the most exceptional young players in the NFL, and I'm just really, really excited to watch him with a really good quarterback. The main drawbacks of a guy like Geno Smith are turnovers, and I don't really think they're as big of a deal as some people make them out to be, but I would be remiss if I didn't say that he is a risk taker at the quarterback position, and sometimes that works out great, like on this play. This is a 3rd and long situation for Seattle, and they have on a pretty common concept for this down and distance, flood. Flood is effectively a 3-level concept where you are choosing the area of the field that the defense vacates. Most quarterbacks will read this 1 to 2, with the vertical route being the alert. Number 3 in this progression is whatever that isolated backside route is, usually a dig, and you're usually going to target that against man coverage. Remember that. What Atlanta is doing here is they're showing a middle of the field open look pre-snap, and you'd think that they're probably in quarters based on the alignment of the corners. They end up coming to some type of man or match coverage with a middle of the field linebacker running down the pole and only a 3-man rush. The second Geno takes his drop, he identifies man coverage based on the way that the corners play this on the boundary side of this play, and his eyes immediately flip backside to this post route by DK Metcalf. Remember, this is a middle of the field open coverage. However, you do have that linebacker dropping down the middle, and AJ Terrell is playing man-to-man against DK Metcalf with outside shade. Geno wants to throw this ball. It's going to be a tight window between the two safeties, the linebacker and the corner, but he does not care. This is an aggressive quarterback, and this is an aggressive throw. All he has to do is put it in the right spot for DK Metcalf to go and get it, and that's exactly what he does for the touchdown on 3rd and long. But it can definitely burn him too, like on this play. I probably don't need to tell a lot of you this, but the Seahawks' red zone offense last year was putrid, and plays like this are a pretty big reason why. Now, I have a lot of gripes with the play call. The spacing here sucks because we're running bench in the low red zone to the far hash. So there's not really a window to work with to fit this ball into, but Geno tries anyway. He tries to throw this corner route to his tight end, even though there is a hang defender that is covering Tyler Lockett's out route that can very easily step back and pick this ball off, and that's exactly what happens. The aggressiveness here kind of burns him because he's trying to make a play on 3rd and long when there is no play to be made. Now, that alone I don't think is enough for me to say that it was a good idea to move on from him. Obviously, his play isn't the only factor here. He's a little bit older and he needs a new contract. So if you look at all those things combined and you say, man, we just want to get younger at the quarterback position and we want to go into a rebuild. Fine, I get it. But That's not really what they did, I don't think, and I'll use this as a segue into the Seahawks discussion of things, but first, I'm going to charge my camera and I'm going to eat some food, so I will see you back here in a minute. All right, we're back now. So, where were we? Trading Geno Smith in a vacuum is, as I said, it's fine. You know what? If you didn't want to extend him and you didn't want to keep pushing along this semi-competitive window or whatever it is, that is totally fine by me. What I don't understand is why the Seahawks immediately turned around and handed a contract to Sam Darnold that ultimately didn't end up being that much less than what Geno Smith was asking for. Now, the guarantees certainly are less, but to me, this signals that they're still trying to be competitive. And I'm sorry, but Geno Smith is just a better quarterback than Sam Darnold. I don't want to discredit what Darnold did in Minnesota last year, but I think we need to consider all the factors of this situation. Seattle's offensive line was poor last year, I already talked about it, but it was especially poor along the interior. Geno Smith just so happened to be very good at handling that pressure. And to be fair, I did research and write most of this video before they spent a first-round pick on North Dakota State's Gray Zabel, but I still don't think that's going to be enough to completely repair this offensive line up front. They didn't really add much else at the position. Now, new offensive coordinator Clint Kubiak might be able to help this out by kind of getting rid of those deep dropbacks with no play action. In fact, I actually have a video on him talking about the Saints last year. But as we saw with the Saints last year, that can only take you so far with the talent that they had up front. It eventually crumbled, and maybe he's going to be able to help Seattle out early in the year by running a ton of under center play action and fixing the run game and all that stuff, but eventually the lack of talent will catch up to them. And with Sam Darnold specifically, if you ask me to talk about the part of his game where he becomes the most volatile, it's when he gets pressured. And I'm sure Kubiak will do what he can to protect him, but considering the fact that there's a massive drop-off in talent from what you're getting in Minnesota to what you're getting in Seattle, and the fact that Clint Kubiak isn't Kevin O'Connell, I fear that Sam Darnold's season is going to look a lot more like his last 2 games in Minnesota than his first 16. I guess I just don't really understand what the direction is in Seattle. You don't want to pay Geno Smith into his late 30s. That's fine. You don't want to pay DK Metcalf $33 million a year. That's fine. I honestly wouldn't want to either. And then you want to cut Tyler Lockett because he's getting up there in age. Totally fine. But you do all those things and then you turn around and you sign Cooper Kupp, who has a pretty similar skill set to JSN, or at the very least will be running a very similar route tree to JSN. You bring in a new offensive coordinator. You give Sam Darnold $35 million. I just don't really understand what they're trying to do here, because it doesn't sound like they're trying to rebuild. And if that was the case, why didn't you just pay Geno Smith? And if you're not trying to rebuild, why are you not going out and getting a guy like Will Fries or Tevin Jenkins or anybody that we know can play amongst the interior? At least then I could talk myself into being like, okay, well, we're going to get younger at the quarterback position, but we're going to support him right. We're going to get him a new offensive coordinator. We're going to get him a good interior of the offensive line. We're going to get him new, younger, or not even younger, but new, cheaper weapons that make a little bit more sense together. But that's just not what happened. It seemed like moving on for the sake of moving on. And their pass game was really the only functional part of their offense last year. They couldn't run the ball. They couldn't run play action. Their best bet was giving Geno the ball and letting him go to work. And they got rid of that and overhauled it for what exactly? It's not like they added anything to their running back room. It's not like they really changed much up front other than Gray Zabel and maybe Josh Jones gets into the lineup. I don't know. I just don't understand the direction Seattle wants to go. And they could prove me wrong. Sam Darnold could go out there and become a certified dude at the quarterback position next year. But until I actually see that happen with my own eyes, I'm going to be pretty skeptical of what they did. And I'll say this again just because I really want to hammer this point home. The issue for me is the areas of the game that Sam Darnold struggles with. He struggles with pressure. But Geno Smith is really good at handling pressure. And for you to maximize this offense, I feel like you need to accept the fact that you can't overhaul this offensive line in one offseason, and you need to go get a quarterback who you think can handle pressure. What I think they did is I think they brought in Clint Kubiak and said, he's going to fix our offensive line. We'll give him Gray Zabel. We'll predict a year 2 leap from Oluwatimi. Charles Cross is a solidified left tackle, and we'll figure out right guard and right tackle. And Clint Kubiak's scheme is going to lift these guys up, and then we can just drop Sam Darnold into it, and he can run all these concepts that he's familiar with. But I just don't think that that's going to work. I think it might get them to 9 to 10 wins, and they could sneak into a wild card spot. But if you're trying to lift the ceiling on this team, which I assume is what Seattle fans want, I don't really see how that happens with moves like this. But I'll just leave it at that. We're most of the way through the offseason. Most fans know what their teams are going to look like. Still wondering if the Steelers will have a starting quarterback by the time this video hits the timeline. Not that I care. Anyways, Raiders fans, I hope things are exciting for you guys this year. I hope you're looking forward to watching Geno Smith and Ashton Genty and all your new pieces fitting together. And I hope the things that I've said about Geno manifest themselves on the field. Not just because I like being right, but also just because I think it would be really cool to see the Raiders have a good quarterback. Seahawks fans, it's the time for optimism. It's right before training camp. Every team thinks they're winning the Super Bowl. So don't let what I say bring you down. Have fun, enjoy the season if you can, and feel free to dunk on me if Sam Darnold goes out there and lights it up. But just know I'll be watching in December and January, and I will hold my thoughts off until then. But anyways, that's all I got, guys. Until next time.